Hi there, and welcome to the Academic Success Center's science-focused series on basic epidemiologic terms and concepts. Today's topic is on measures of geographic dispersion: case, endemic, pandemic, and epidemic. The learning outcomes associated with this presentation are to 1. Accurately define the basic epidemiologic terms of geographic dispersion, a case, as well as epidemic, pandemic, and endemic disease conditions. And 2. To understand the relevance of these terms as they inform the field of surveillance epidemiology, and how disease data are expressed as a function of how disease spread within specific populations, over land masses, and across time. The term geographic dispersion, or land spread, can be defined as how diseases spread around and within specific geographic or land-based regions across the Earth. As a measure of practicality, a case for a disease, infectious or otherwise, is associated with meeting the diagnostic criteria for that given disease. By quantifying the number of known cases of a particular disease, we are then able to understand how, and possibly why, a disease spreads throughout a given organic population across an associated landmass or population. One term associated with geographic dispersion is the word epidemic. An epidemic for a given disease is defined as a widely spread occurrence of a disease across and within a community above and beyond the expected cases for that disease within a given period of time. For example, if a local population normally has 10% of that population known to be expected to have a seasonal influenza virus within a given time frame, but the amount of known cases exceeds or is over that 10%, say 20 to 40% of that population having the virus, that population can be labeled as having an epidemic of that specific infectious disease. One important thing to know about an epidemic classification is that epidemics occur in relatively small geographical areas of a population, say a school, city, county, or even a state. The epidemiologic term endemic refers to relatively stable amounts of cases for a given disease that is consistently present within a given population across time. For example, chronic hypertension or clinical obesity can be considered endemic disease states in that they are constantly present within a given population in relatively higher amounts across time. Endemic disease states can be considered those that affect specific regions within a country, say the northeastern states. A pandemic disease label, in contrast, is widely occurring and vastly spreading amounts of cases of a disease across an entire country, or more commonly, planet. For example, COVID-19 was quickly labeled as a pandemic disease condition after it was found to have spread across the entire planet in significantly high amounts. A good memory mnemonic is P for pandemic equals P for planet. This illustration shows of how the terms endemic, epidemic, and pandemic can be visualized to help you better understand them. As you can see on the far left graphic, an endemic disease state is where cases for disease can be seen in relatively stable amounts across various regions of land, most oftentimes in relatively lower amounts. In the center graphic, an epidemic disease classification normally affects a specific area of a given landmass. Remember that an epidemic is a sudden increase in the amount of disease over and above what is normally expected for that disease. Finally, the far right graphic illustrates a pandemic disease state, whereby a disease has spread across the entire planet in significantly high amounts. Each circle you see on this illustration refers to a cluster or group of cases for a given disease. Modern-day epidemiologists use increasingly darker colors for sequentially bigger circles to represent higher amounts of a given disease within a population. In essence, the bigger the circle, the higher and the more cases for having that disease. These two pictures illustrate two different human infectious disease epidemics across time: cholera, or Black Death, and smallpox. Both infectious diseases quickly spread across the localized population in very quick periods of time and incapacitated many people who became cases for that specific disease. Interestingly, epidemiologists of the day used spatial relationships of these cases as well as their specific activities to establish the causes for a given infectious disease. For example, in downtown London, UK, John Snow, MD, established a link between using a specific water pump on a specific street and contracting cholera, which resulted in an epidemic for that specific disease within the area of that city. This graphic illustrates common endemic diseases across various land masses and the amounts of both cases and deaths associated with that disease. As you can see, the clusters or circles get bigger as they represent more cases for that disease. From the smaller circle of cholera, as mentioned in the previous slide, to the larger circle of influenza virus. It is important to note that these endemic diseases were consistently present in a population for an extended period of time. We are all living out this pandemic for the coronavirus. Further, we all understand how it is spread across the globe and how we have had to adapt our behaviors, such as mask wearing, in attempts to reduce the amount of disease in our populations. This presentation has focused on specific terms we use to illustrate the spread of a disease across a population within given periods of time. We've defined the terms geographic dispersion, case, epidemic, endemic, and pandemic. We have seen that these terms are each associated with given amounts of disease within specific populations across time. Epidemiologists use these terms to represent trends in the amounts and locations of infections, and, in many cases, establish links between locations, activities or behaviors, and infections, thereby developing recommendations for how to treat or prevent a specific disease.